Hello, everyone. Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. I'm talking about today. Mostly it's just kind of about food preservation in general and some of the benefits of the different types. And while there's other older methods like salt curing and stuff, smoking that I personally have not done, I have nothing against them. I keep saying I need to just do at least some salt curing and just try that with a little bit of meat, maybe some fish or something. Just to try it, just to see what I think. Is the salt curing for medieval times was probably the most popular one, especially with fish. They did do drying, just hanging meats up to dry, but the salt cured fish was highly valuable. So, which is interesting. That's why, I really need to try that because I always forget to even mention it since it's something I've never done. So I need to just do it. So, there are people around here that have smokers that will smoke some different meats, which we should try that at some point too. But as far as the salt curing, I've never tried salt cured meat that I know of, nor tried doing it myself. So let's start off with just basically what I want to talk about is just to hit a few points of each thing, but also talk about the benefits and why I think it's a good idea to have at least several different ways to preserve your foods for long term than just one. I don't think we should be entirely dependent on canning, certainly not entirely dependent on freezing, not on dehydrating, most certainly not on freeze drying, because not everybody can even afford an expensive paperweight like that. And fermenting isn't the best choice for everyone or the best way to put up all types of food. Not everybody likes fermented fish. So water bath canning. So as far as getting set up in canning itself, that's the cheapest, easiest way to get started. If you absolutely had to, you could water bath can everything that you want to can. It's just making sure you do it for the right amount of time. Boiling the stuff for a minimum of 3 hours, no matter what size the jar is, no matter what's in it. Now, there's a few things, I always forget what it is. There's something that you need to boil for 4 hours. Now, I always forget what it is. But at any rate, it's really cheap to get started. Because all you need is a big pot, something to lay down on the bottom so your jars aren't right against the heat source. That's why a lot of times you can buy like a water bath canner, which typically is like one of those enamelware type really big pots. And it's because those are thinner so they can heat up quicker. And then they usually come with a rack. And those aren't super expensive, not compared to a pressure canner. But I saw a water bath canner that looked like it had never been used before, even though I already had one. It was only $5. I bought it. I just like that. I grabbed it and bought it before anyone else could because I'm like, it's always good to have a backup because that really big pot is nice for other things too. But you can use a pressure canner as a water bath canner. But at any rate, if you got a big pot, the first things I water bath canned, I just used the biggest pot I could find and laid a kitchen towel at the bottom and put the jars on top of that so they're not sitting directly at the bottom. Because it can crack the jars if your jars are sitting right against the bottom and it gets really hot. It can happen. So the benefits of water bath canning is it's so much easier and less expensive to get started, especially if you live in places like the UK. I've had so many people from the UK tell me that it is either near impossible to get a pressure canner, or even if you can find one, highly expensive. They're expensive enough here in the States, but even more expensive to them over there. So this is why I think the water bath canning thing and knowing about it and learning about it, and that it still is a very common way that a lot of people can, that we've been taught to be afraid of without understanding, all the basics, just like those charts that I shared. And I also put the link to those again in the description box. But typically water bath canning, we're taught to only use that for high acid foods, whatever. You guys know the drill. The one thing with the water bath canning is times well, and pressure canning as well. With low acid foods, the time's all the same, it's 3 hours, with maybe some variances, where with high acid foods, it's the water bath counting is going to vary by size and type. I, you know, yeah, type. Like some things won't need to be canned for as long. Like, well, even pressure canning is the same way. I was surprised when I assumed that all vegetables were 75 minutes for a pint and 90 minutes for a quart, because everything I was canning that I just, and for meat, again, it was the same thing over and over. So when I went to can carrots the first time, that's what I did, 75 minutes for a pint. Come to find out, you know, and I think I said something about it in a video, and a couple of people were like, why are you canning your carrots for that long? They only need 25 minutes for a pint. And I'm like, what? So I go look it up, and I'm like, I must have never even looked it up. I just made the assumption. So that's why it's a good idea to have your books. Now, it didn't hurt anything canning it longer as far as the carrots, but I wasted an hour's worth of fuel run it for 75 minutes when I could have just done 25 minutes, you know, because like I've said before, I do it outside on a propane burner. And I was like, man, I could have saved some fuel. But, you know, they were definitely done. But they weren't, surprisingly, they were not mushy. In fact, I've had some carrots that I canned at the proper time that seemed softer than the ones that I canned for too long. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the benefits of pressure canning. So one thing I do like about pressure canning is that it is definitely faster when it comes to your low acid foods. So you're talking half the time. And because, you know, if you're water bath canning low acid foods, you got a minimum of 3 hours, no matter the size of the jar. But if you're pressure canning, it's going to be only an hour and a half or an hour and 15 minutes or even less when you're pressure canning. So you're not using up as much fuel and you're getting the job done faster. So yes, to me, pressure canning, I'm so glad I have that canner. Because of that, I can save a lot of time doing that. And then out of either of these canning methods, one of the other benefits is that you're saving freezer space. Typically our freezer space is going to be the one thing is at the most minimum is freezer space. So anything that's going to help us save space in our freezer, plus not being dependent on the freezer, that's always a plus. I mean, I do freeze a lot of stuff. We have a couple of good sized chest freezers and I have a lot of stuff in them. One is nearly twice the size of the other one. The other one isn't huge, it's probably a medium sized chest freezer, and the other one's the biggest one we could find and fit in this area out here. You know, so obviously having ways where you don't have to be dependent on the freezer in the event of power outages, especially if you don't have any backups like, you know, solar power or some kind of gas or diesel generator. So knowing how to have that stuff put up, in fact, if you don't have any way of keeping your freezer running during an extended power outage, you're going to want to look at drastically reducing the amount of stuff that you store in the freezer. For us, it's not a big deal because we have several ways that we can keep our freezers running. And it's just not a big deal. Most commonly, our power outages around here are only a few hours to maybe a day. We've had some go longer, go for several days. Now let's talk about dehydrating. And the benefits of that is that there's so many different ways to dehydrate, and it can be the absolute cheapest way to get started in food preservation because you don't have to have any fancy equipment. If you live in especially if you live in a place that isn't high in humidity, you can do like people have done for centuries and simply hang stuff to dry. Some people will put like herbs in paper bags because they'll dry really well in there. And then the paper bag will also prevent it from collecting dust, bugs, and too much sunlight if you're hanging it outside. I linked to the video that I did several years ago. I really need to redo that video and kind of update it, but where I talked about various different ways of dehydrating. So there's so many different kinds of ways to go about it. You can use your oven. You don't have to invest in dehydrators, which to me, I love having my dehydrators, but I also have my racks that Patrick built out of old bed rails. And then we bought some, the mesh stuff, stainless steel to fit in there because he made them to fit those. And they were the kind that you buy to go to a smoker, and do a lot of dehydrating on there through the winter, and late fall to through spring. I do a lot of dehydrating on there, and so it sits next to my wood stove. Sometimes if I have something that needs to dehydrate faster, stuff like meat, I'll put it on top of the wood stove. Stuff where I'm not worried about it burning, because it's more delicate. You can even use whatever existing heat you already have in your house, even if it's not a wood stove, and just find a way to set up something to dry your stuff. This will work really good for herbs, vegetables, and more. It's not going to work good for meats that you're definitely going to want to use your oven, because the first thing I ever dehydrated was jerky in my oven long before I had a dehydrator. You can buy those little net things they're usually pretty inexpensive, that you can hang up, and they have little shelves in them that you can set stuff in. You can create your own dehydrating setup using an old screen door and whatever else, or if you're not sure what the screen is made out of, you can still have the screen there, and then just lay some linen or 100% cotton, muslin, whatever, across it, and then lay your fruits, vegetables, herbs on there, and just set it out in the sun and let it dry. So many ways to do it. So it's like the cheapest way to get started in food preservation, and you can dehydrate all kinds of stuff. And in most cases, your dehydrated foods are going to take up far less space than anything that was canned or frozen. So that saves a lot of pantry space that way. The downside, obviously, is that there are some foods that when you dehydrate them, they don't rehydrate as well as others. Now, I had somebody comment, they one time dehydrated a bunch of vegetables. They didn't say what kind. They said then they just took them and threw them in a bowl of water and let them soak overnight for 12 hours. And they said they never fully rehydrated. And so they never did it again. And I'm thinking, well, that was it sounds to me like gave up before you tried all your options. So here's the thing. When it comes to canning, dehydrating, whatever, you should always, and I know I preach this one a lot, always start with something small. Don't make the mistake that I've done myself and do up a whole bunch of something just to find out you really don't like it. You don't like the way it doesn't rehydrate super well. You don't like the taste of it once it's done. Or if you've canned it, maybe it's too mushy. Maybe you just don't like it, period. You'd prefer to have it this way or that way. And I've made that mistake where I've canned up a whole bunch of stuff, then found out I really didn't like it. I just assumed I would. And it was not my favorite thing. So yeah, just try. Don't give up just because one thing you didn't turn out well. Maybe you didn't use the proper method of rehydrating. Like most things, especially vegetables, they need to be not just soaked in room temperature water, they need to be cooked in hot water for a few minutes for them, and some things longer than a few minutes for them to get to where they're not chewy. So there are certain things I do like having some in a canned form because it's so fast and easy. You just open it up, heat it. If you have to, you can eat it straight from the jar. I was loving Deb's story that she shared where she was talking about walking in and finding her kids and all the neighbor kids all with a quart jar of stew that she had just put up and a spoon and eating it straight from the jar. I mean, it wasn't even heated up. They just liked it so much like that. That's what I love about canned foods, is that you can eat it straight from the jar, no rehydrating necessary. So there's benefits to all of these things. So like if Patrick, especially when he was going back and forth down to California with his, to help his dad with various things before he passed away, he was going like several times a year, and it was a long trip. So I would always make sure he had at least a couple of pint-sized jars of chili. And if he absolutely had to, he could just open that jar of chili and eat it straight from the jar. There was no rehydrating needed. It might be cold, but it would still be tasty straight from the jar. But as far as storage goes, I like dehydrated chili. It tastes just as good once you rehydrate it, and it only takes a few minutes. You just add some water and you heat it through. And usually by the time it gets fully heated through, it's fully rehydrated. Unlike some things, it's because the chili was already cooked previously. So anything that's been cooked previously typically is going to rehydrate much faster than those things that you dehydrate raw. Now, rhubarb, I will always dehydrate it raw. I'll never, ever again cook it first, because the way I use it, it actually, even if you leave it in pieces, the dehydrated pieces, you add it to hot water and cook it for a few minutes, it does not take it that long at all to rehydrate and soften up. Now, I think part of that is because rhubarb is very, very porous. So it dries quickly, but then it also will cook quickly. So it's kind of makes it more similar to like freeze-dried food. The reason freeze-dried food holds its shape, size, and rehydrates faster is because of all the air pockets in there. Because it, it forms when it's frozen first. So that's the freezing part of the freeze drying. And this is why freeze drying takes so long, is it has to freeze it first, unless you put it in the freezer overnight and then put it in your freeze dryer. Then it dries it out by basically pulling the ice out of the food. And so it just basically it turns it into a gas, and it's called sublimation, if I remember correctly. And it leaves those little pockets in there where that's why it's lighter and airier, and that's why it also rehydrates faster than a lot of your dehydrated stuff that was previous, that might have been dehydrated raw. I still have no interest in getting a freeze dryer, but I do like having a few freeze dried things on hand. So I do buy from Mother Earth products because of that. But a lot of it is stuff that I could live without if I had to. It's more like I consider them luxury items. So freeze dried pineapple, freeze dried mango, any fruit that has a lower amount of sugar, dehydrated will powder up well. But things like pineapple and mango are very high in sugar. And so when you dehydrate them, they'll stay chewy, which can be really tasty. I love dehydrated pineapple just as much as freeze dried. But if I want to powder it to use it as flavoring, then the dehydrated in those higher sugar items isn't going to work as well as freeze dried. So that's why I will get the organic pineapple, organic mango, even organic sour cherries, and other such freeze dried goods from Mother Earth products, just to have on hand again as luxury items. And then freezing, the benefits of freezing is it's easy. You can just like if I get packaged meats from Butcher Box, from Azure Standard, like I've been getting that beef bacon, I might order another box of that, because that beef bacon, that Thousand Hills beef bacon is so good. I can't believe I like it better than Painted Hills, but I do, because Painted Hills is pretty darn good. The Thousand Hills is better in our personal opinion for the beef bacon. And just throw it in the freezer as is. It's already frozen when I get it. I just throw it in there. It's easy. I do that with the Butcher Box meat. But even if you're wrapping the meat yourself, you just wrap it, you throw it in the freezer. It's just easy. And then when it comes to certain things like my berries, some of the berries, I've canned blackberries and stuff before, but I tend to prefer to freeze them. That's just me. I freeze my blackberries, raspberries, blueberries, and currants. And then whenever I need them, they usually don't take too long to thaw out. Well, my grapes too. The main reason I freeze the grapes is because they're a pretty tart grape. They're best for winemaking. So I'm not going to be making a whole bunch of gallons of wine at a time. And so I like to freeze them until I need them. I get so many grapes now, I have to give a bunch of them away because we just don't go through that quickly. I like to freeze them because not only is it something quick and easy I can do with the grapes straight from the vine, freezing them makes them a lot easier to juice when I'm ready to make wine from them. And they also have seeds in them, which is another reason. They actually taste really good if you can get them at their sweetest point before the birds start eating them all. But they have seeds in them. But they have a nice taste, but most of them will make you pucker up. So what is the other thing? And snow peas. So I mentioned the snow peas earlier because snow peas, if you can them, they can get really mushy. And I like to keep them in the freshest form I can for using in stir fries. I just pull a small jar out, let it thaw. I've already cut them to the size I want before I freeze them. And then they're still, they're going to be softer, obviously, once they thawed than they were when they were fresh, but they're still going to have some of that more fresh quality to them. And so I prefer doing that with snow peas. And then you can also ferment them. So freezing's nice for those things that you don't want to dehydrate. You don't want to can because you want to keep them as raw as possible. That's where the freezing can be nice. On top of the fact that it's easy. But then you got to wait for things to thaw. And so if you forgot to pull something out at a certain time and you needed it right away, that can be a bummer. Whereas if it's canned, you just pull it out. Hey, it's ready to go. I just got to heat it up or whatever. And then of course there's fermenting. I don't, usually when I do videos like this, I don't know, fermenting is almost a secondary thought because when it comes to preservation, fermenting's not something I use to preserve much. I only do that every now and then with onions and garlic, but even then, not that often. Garlic, I prefer to freeze it. And the reason why is that fermenting garlic, it loses some of its stronger flavor. And same thing with the onions. They lose some of that stronger flavor. However, when they're fermented, you can just pull them out and you've got at least a quicker, they're preserved, but you don't have to wait for them to thaw. But garlic thaws really quickly. I like really quickly. In fact, you can start cutting up the garlic while it's still frozen. I did that the other night when I was doing the fried rice. I took a little packet of, because I get it from Azure Standard, the frozen garlic, and they'll have it in little packets inside a bag. And those little packets are usually just the right size amount of garlic for whatever I'm using it in. And I just start chopping it up right away. It's easy to cut through frozen garlic. So I prefer it frozen, but you can ferment garlic, onions for use in dishes like that and just take out what you need. And then some people like to use fermenting for everything. That of course was also another popular method of preserving foods during the medieval times because it didn't require much. You didn't have to have refrigeration. Still a lot of times relying on some kind of cold storage, just like you would with your root veggies. So some kind of root cellar or something like that, where you can keep stuff at a cooler temperature, not necessarily refrigerator cold, but cold enough that these things can last for months. Like, potatoes, pumpkins, carrots, apples. And then of course there's those other methods that don't require any electricity to keep things cold. And that would be like your, what was popular over, back east, like your spring houses, your ice houses, and the like. And these can be things that would be, one may want to consider if you're able to do it in the event that you don't have electricity to keep certain things at a cooler temperature. Here, it's not a massive deal just because we live in a cooler climate. Not that we can't get some pretty hot weather from time to time, but it's pretty short-lived when we do. I can just keep a lot of stuff. Like I've kept squash, potatoes, and other such in our pantry, which is never heated. And I've had that stuff last for months back there. It would probably last a whole year though if I had it in a root cellar where it stayed consistently cold, all through the year. I think that was really it. Just covering some of the pluses and minuses of the different preserving methods, and just remembering that a lot of it is going to depend on you. It's going to depend on the food, and it's going to depend on, I say try them all for each thing, whatever's available to you as far as that goes. Try dehydrating a little bit of this, try canning some of that. So anyway, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Thanks for coming in. Take care, and God bless.